You think about Rome, Persia, the British Empire. History is just littered with the ghosts of these incredible powers. But is it all random? Or is there a pattern to how they rise and, well, how they fall? We're going to dive into the life cycle of empires, a pattern that you see again and again and again throughout history.
It's really one of the biggest questions out there, right? From ancient Egypt all the way up to the modern era, it seems like every great power follows this same predictable path. A spectacular rise to the top, a nice long period of dominance, and then the inevitable slide downwards. So is it just destiny, something written in the stars, or is it a series of mistakes that maybe could have been avoided? Okay, so first things first, what are we even talking about when we say empire? Well, at its core, it's a huge, powerful state that controls a bunch of other territories from one central hub. The whole system is built on pulling in resources, think taxes, tribute, goods, from those outer areas, the periphery, to make the center richer and more powerful. It's a model that worked for ancient Rome just as much as it did for more recent empires. So where do these giants even come from? I mean, they don't just pop into existence, right? The spark that lights the fire of an empire usually comes from a very specific mix of ingredients, a combination that gives one group a massive, massive leg up on all of its neighbors. Think of it like this. Empires are built on a bedrock of fundamentals. First, you've got to have land that's fertile enough to grow way more food than you need. Then you need that homeland to be easy to defend, maybe surrounded by mountains or deserts. You also need a way to get around and project your power, like rivers or a coastline. And then there's the secret sauce, this powerful sense of unity, what some historians call asabiyyah, a shared purpose that just glues everyone together. If you look at early Rome or the first Chinese dynasties, they had all of this in spades. And that connectivity piece? It's so much more than just being able to trade. For Rome, their famous roads were literally the veins of the empire. They were the circulatory system for power. They moved legions super fast to crush a rebellion, they let tax collectors get out there and fill the treasury, and they brought critical information right back to the capital. All roads lead to Rome wasn't just a catchy phrase. It was the literal architecture of their control. With all those foundations in place, an empire can build its golden age. This is the peak of its power, an era of peace and prosperity like the famous Pax Romana. But here's the kicker. Even at its absolute height, an empire starts planting the seeds of its own downfall. So any empire that manages to stick around for the long haul has to make this one critical switch. It has to go from a plunder economy, just taking stuff through conquest, to a production economy that actually builds sustainable wealth. Spain in the 16th century is a perfect example of what not to do. They got totally hooked on silver from the New World, a classic resource curse. When that silver started to run out, so did Spain's power. Rome, on the other hand, did it right. They successfully integrated their provinces, turning them into productive parts of this huge, interconnected economic machine. And this is the great paradox of it all. Success itself ends up creating the biggest problems. Wealth leads to decadence, power leads to arrogance and complacency. All those tough, gritty qualities that helped the empire rise in the first place, discipline, unity, a hunger to succeed, they all start to fade away, right when things are looking their best. And that brings us to the next phase, the Great Unraveling. This is the point where the empire's own massive size, its complexity, and all its past victories, they become its greatest weaknesses. The whole machine just becomes too big, too complicated, and way too expensive to keep running. One of the biggest culprits here is something called imperial overstretch. Just picture Rome trying to defend thousands of miles of border along the Rhine, the Danube, and the Euphrates rivers. The cost of all those forts, those walls, those legions, it eventually gets to be more than the territory is even worth. The empire is literally spending more money to hold onto its borders than it's getting back. And at the same time, back home, the empire walks right into a complexity trap. A new problem pops up, so what do? They add a new layer of government, more bureaucracy to deal with it. But every new layer adds more cost and makes things more complicated, and you start getting less and less bang for your buck. The Roman Emperor Diocletian famously tried this, splitting the empire into more and more pieces to manage it. But the result was a system that was just too top-heavy, too expensive, and super fragile. Then society itself starts to fracture from the inside out. At the very top, you get what some historians call elite overproduction. Basically, too many ambitious, powerful people fighting over a fixed number of top jobs. And what does that lead to? Vicious infighting and brutal civil wars. Meanwhile, at the bottom, the productive middle class, the people who actually pay the taxes, they get squeezed into poverty. The empire's tax base just withers away. You can actually see this financial crisis happening in their money. To pay their bills, the emperors just started watering down their coins, mixing in less and less silver. So in the 1st century, a Roman denarius was almost pure silver. Fast forward to the late 3rd century, and it's basically a worthless piece of copper with a thin silver coating. This is exactly what hyperinflation looked like in the ancient world. So how does it all finally end? Well, once all these different forces get going, the decline often speeds up and turns into a final dramatic collapse. But the end of an empire isn't always the end of a civilization. It can go a couple of different ways. See, everything starts to lock into this terrifying feedback loop, a real death spiral. The money crisis means you can't pay your soldiers, a weaker army can't secure the borders from invaders, those invasions and revolts wreck farming and trade, which means, yep, even less tax money coming in. Each problem just makes the next one worse, creating this cascade of failure that becomes pretty much impossible to stop. But the fall can look really different depending on where you are. The Western Roman Empire went through a total system collapse, what we sometimes call a dark age, where trade networks, literacy, and old institutions just vanished. But in a place like China, dynasties would collapse all the time, only for a new one to rise from the ashes and use the exact same cultural and government template. It's like a phoenix pattern, a cycle of death and rebirth. Which, of course, leaves us with that final, unavoidable question. We've just walked through these timeless patterns of history, the rise, the overstretch, the internal decay, and the final collapse or transformation. These are the rhythms that have played out for thousands of years. So when you look at the world today, what stage of the cycle do you think we're in now?